Oh, yeah. You know what time it is. Time for your daily dose of goodness. This is the dailybreadproject.com. This is where we bring you love, positivity, all the good things in the world come to you on the Daily Bread Project. I'm going to bring in my guest. It looks like he's here on time, like the professional he is. And then we're going to rock this thing live to Facebook. So I'm going to bring you in, brother. Then I'm going to bring us live, and then we are going to rock and roll. So let me make sure that everything's working on the page. And if all my technologies cooperate, we'll be live in just a second. I'll do the intro and we will rock and roll. Remember, everybody, if you're tuning in on iTunes, thedailybreadproject.com, 10 a.m. daily. We've got videos there. We've got links to the podcast episodes. We've got everything there. The latest episodes are there. So thedailybreadproject.com. And while I'm talking about that, have you shared this? Have you been watching this? If you've been tuning in and rocking with us, if you've been getting some positivity, some love, some great ideas, some motivation, why not share this? What is stopping you from sharing the love? I got to ask you. So here it is. We are live on Facebook, and I guess it's intro time. Let's do the intro. You are listening to the dailybreadproject.com. The world is crazy. There's chaos, panic, pandemics. People are wearing face masks, and it's scary as hell out there. But you come here for the love. None of us have masks on. This is the real us. We're bringing you the true love, the true opportunity. Everything that's good in the world is right here, 10 a.m. daily, thedailybreadproject.com. And I got a big heart, but I need help. I can't do this all on my own. So I've enlisted the help of the smartest, most positive, most powerful people I know to bring you the goodness. Today I have Mr. Dan Barrett. What is up, my man?
Not much, man. That's a killer intro. I like it. Yeah, it's I'm feeling good, man. It's a morning, getting started. I got a bunch of stuff done already this morning, and I was cracking my back while you were doing the intro, and yeah, feeling good.
You loosened up, man? You feeling good then?
Yeah, as I get older, I am less and less loose at any given moment of the day. So yeah, any little twist in the spine is generally going to help me out. So yeah, I feel pretty good.
All right, so we have Mr. Dan Barrett from REI Marketing Nerds. You can find him anywhere you listen to podcasts. And this guy is another OG. I see you're already up to episode number 89, doing deals during the pandemic. This guy is the real deal. Check him out. So I am going to give you the lay of the land.
Yeah.
And then we'll rock into what I have for you today. And essentially, we talk about power, positivity, leadership, love, and opportunity. I want to bring all the good things in the world. So let's start right here. Dan, where do you draw your power from?
Where do I draw my power from? Wow, that's an interesting question, man. I think for me, the way I think about how I kind of move through my life is I have a lot of, I kind of view the average human being, and myself especially, right, as kind of having a lot of weird sort of meat sack tendencies, right? So it's like we all have these like weird things that are built into how we operate as bodies, right? So we have like, I need a certain amount of sugar in my blood, and I need, a certain amount of sleep, and I need a certain amount of physical movement and all this stuff, right? And that's kind of like the flesh part of who we are. And then we have this kind of mental side of who we are, which is still physical, but that's the part that can be like, hey, the hypotenuse of the triangle is 2 times the whatever, right? It can operate on this like really high abstract plane. And for me, what helps me be productive and be kind of really impact the world around me and affect the world around me, it's when I find ways to use that sort of mental abstracted part of myself to sort of surpass my physical limitations, right? So I kind of view myself as like, look, if I didn't really think about my life very consciously and really try to make rational decisions and use powerful mental models and use systems. If I wasn't able to do all that, I would be the most lazy, pathetic person you've ever talked to on the show. I could guarantee it. Like, my default mode is just on the couch, playing video games, eating Taco Bell. I weigh 5,000 pounds. Like, that's what I would be. And it's only because I'm able to use mental models and processes and systems and like all this stuff that I've learned through business and through reading and through learning and through mentorship and stuff, that I'm able to do what I do. And so for me, that's where power comes from. It's like, power comes from learning how the world really works and learning to apply those principles to what I do on a day-to-day basis, even in a really small way. And every time I can add a little bit to that stack of mental models or a brick in that wall of kind of rationality, I get more powerful, right? In the sense of like, I'm able to affect the world in a more dramatic way. So for me, that's how I think about it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This guy is on point, by the way. He didn't know these questions were coming. Listen to that. So
Yeah.
here we go. All right, let's move into the next one, because you have always been, you've got a great sense of humor. You always make me laugh. You always seem to be positive. And so that is the next area I want to tackle. How do you stay positive?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I'll be the first to say, this whole kind of coronavirus COVID-19 thing, it had a bigger effect on me mentally than I probably thought it would, right? Because if you look at like my day-to-day life right now, I'm in my office right now because no one really works. I'm in a room by myself. No one's really in the building, right? So I can still leave the house and come here. I live like 2 minutes away from my office. I go to the office and I go home. It's kind of the same as it was pre-coronavirus, right? I go to the office, I go home. But little things like not going to the gym or not being able to walk down to a local coffee shop, right? Those things aren't really there anymore. And that had a bigger effect on me than I anticipated. And so it's been a little bit of a struggle, right? I will be the first to say, I have a very emotional part of my personality, right? Like I think you know this, but I've talked about this sometimes. Like, a lot of people know me through music, and my music tends to be like very depressing, and like I tend to be like very emotional in my music, right? So it's like I have this kind of like artsy side of me that's kind of very up and down and very, if you're like a horoscope person, it's very Pisces of me, right? That's how I am. So it's like that part kind of hit me harder than I anticipated. And so to stay positive for me, I've done a couple things. Like, one is I really just try to focus on like what I can control and let everything else go. So, you're doing stuff like this podcast. I started a Facebook group and I was like, I'm just teaching. For me, it was like, how do I read? How do I take notes? How do I process the stuff that I read? How do I turn it into materials that I then teach? I was like, I'm going to teach a class on that for free. And it wasn't a project I had any idea I was going to do before I did it. I was just like, I just want to do something where I'm interacting with people and it's fun and there's no pressure. And it ended up being this really amazing process that really gave me a lot, right? So I was like, oh, okay, that's kind of kept me really positive. And then honestly, it's like, I think the term like self-care is really kind of played out. Like, it's like, self-care, I kind of like roll my eyes. But I have to remind myself that like, yeah, it's like every now and then it's okay to just take a bath or like, like play a video game. It's like I've been really trying not to like beat myself up, man, because things happen in the world and it's okay to have a reaction to it, right? Like, we kind of have this perception as like, I have to be like above it all. Well, it's like, no one's above it all. We're all in it all the time, right? So I try not to beat myself up for what is a reasonable emotional reaction. But the flip side of that is, you take care of yourself when you need it, and you focus on the stuff that wherever you are, whatever you do, you have a zone of control around you where you're like, that's my stuff. That's the stuff I control, even if it's just what you eat, right? Down to literally whatever it is. So you just control that stuff and try to let go a little bit of what the world does, because it's going to move on without us, So that's worked for me. And, a glass of wine here or there, that'll help too. It's like, I try not to take any of that stuff too far, but, I try not to beat myself up either.
I like what you're saying there too. And I think that I agree with you, by the way, with the self-care. It's like I hate saying it, but I agree with the concept.
Yeah, it's a good concept that has been so punched in the face like by everyone that uses it that it's real eye rolling, right? Because it's become like, you picture like I got the fuzzy slippers and the weighted blanket and a bottle of wine, and it's like it's just kind of like I get it, but I think especially like you and I are both entrepreneurial, right? We're like driven people, we're ambitious people. We hold ourselves up in contrast to this imaginary version of what an entrepreneur is supposed to be. Like, I need to be productive all the time, and I need to be crushing it all the time. I need to be working all the time. I need to be making more money. I need to be doing this. And the person we have in our head is this person who like has no problems. They have no stress. They're always productive. And like that person flat out never existed. It's never existed ever, right? It's like JP Morgan, I guarantee, is like having mental breakdowns in the bathroom, just like screaming in his top hat, because like that's what everybody does. It's the human thing. So it's like we have to remember that it's like there's only so much the human body can produce, and it's a really good, the whole self-care thing. It's a good counterweight to this natural tendency we have to just like drive the car or the horse or whatever metaphor you want to use, like into the ground, because we think like that's what's going to get us there. So it's a really useful concept. It's just kind of like, it gets thrown around so much that it's like, it feels like it feels almost like dirty to kind of say like, well, I'm going to engage in self-care. But hey, man, it's like whatever you got to do. Because I'm sure you found the same thing. It's like the rest and relaxation stuff is what makes you productive during the day. You start skipping that stuff a couple nights, and then like all of a sudden you're in the office, and just for me, how it manifests is like I'm staring off into space. I'm in front of my computer, like theoretically I'm at work, but I'm checked out, right? I'm not really there. I'm not doing anything productive. So it's like you got to make sure you take care of that. Your flesh suit. You got to take care of that guy, or gal, because it'll catch up with you sooner or later.
Dude, I love that on so many levels, and I love the mental pictures. It's always
Yeah. It's all mental pictures. It's what I do. Yeah.
Too good. JP Morgan screaming in his top hat, classic.
Well, it's like I think about, because so before I was in business, right, I was training to be a history teacher. It's what I wanted to do. So when I got my master's in history and education, and you kind of had to pick a thing to specialize in. So my specialty was the Gilded Age, which was like, kind of like the 1880s to the 1920s. And it's this like really fascinating period because it's the first period of American history that feels recognizable to me, right? Like the Civil War, it's like, I can't really picture what it's like to be alive in the Civil War, right? But like, if you look at like 1910, it's like, you kind of got stuff that like, you start to get like sort of like cars and stuff that looks relatively familiar. You have trains and you have trolleys and people are wearing suits, and it's all just, it feels recognizable for the first time, but it's so long ago that it's still kind of like, like the past is a foreign country kind of thing. And so the Gilded Age is like the time where you start to get, like the robber barons, like start to get like Carnegie and Morgan and like, all these people. And you read about them and it's just like, holy Lord, like they are just this weird race of people who they're working all the time. And, they're like throwing the coal in the stove to keep warm while they're doing like all their bookkeeping, like by hand. And I would always like compare myself to them and be like, God, they achieve so much. They're doing so much, and it's like I can barely stare at the computer for 2 hours before having a breakdown, right? And I'm like, what's the deal? And then I'm like, oh, right. The alternative for them was like they were going to work in like the coal mines. Like that was what they were getting away from. So it's like, yeah, work was pretty sweet back then compared to, shoveling the horse manure for 90 hours a week or something. So I tend to just kind of like, I've tried to leave that behind and just be like, hey, we all exist in this modern world where it's super stressful. And good Lord, man, it's like the coronavirus stuff is a good example of this, where the pace of information, it's like, I differ from a lot of people in the sense that like, I think at least like entrepreneurial people, there's a real trend of being like don't watch the news, don't read the news is bad for you, right? And that comes from a very real place, because if you're like plugged into cable news 24/7, it is going to just wreck your nervous system. Like your brain is going to be in constant fight or flight. It's going to be pumping you full of adrenaline like all the time. And this is just, it's a known thing, right? It's literally the same thing as if you just sit in front and you have a live stock ticker and you just decide to watch your retirement fund go up or down like all day. It's like, that is a beeline to an early grave. Like that's what it is, right? So that comes from a real place. But I also believe that like, hey, we live in a democracy. And part of the deal of getting to live in a democracy is like, as a citizen who can vote, it's just my personal belief, we have an ethical responsibility to stay up to date, at least educated to the point where you can make an educated decision about who you want to run the show. Because your decision about who to vote for affects all these people that can't vote. So for example, people who went to prison, like can't vote, like your decision affects them, right? It affects young people. It affects old people that can't get out to the polls. Like this is the deal, right? It's the the old kind of like Greek ideal of you show up to the Senate and you argue with everyone and you make decisions. So for me, it's like staying up to date with the news is an ethical responsibility of living in the greatest country on earth, right? America. So I want to stay up to date. Like I want to, for a long time, my kind of solution to this was I get the Sunday paper. So it's like, I get it once a week. It's the Sunday paper. So like the Sunday paper tends to have like the opinion section, tends to have a whole bunch of stuff in it the weekly paper doesn't have. And I'm like, cool, I'm going to read the weekend paper. And that's going to be how I stay up to date. And it's kind of useful, right? It's a useful kind of pace to it. It's not too much. But when the coronavirus stuff started happening, it started like just kind of going online every day and being like, where are we at today? Like, where are we at today? Like you sort of fell into this thing of like watching the stock ticker, except now the stock ticker is like people dying. So it's way more stressful. And it's like that stuff will just, it'll run you into the ground. So I really had to put like restrictions. Like I literally have an app on my computer that will like not let me check the New York Times if it's not like on a weekend. Like it's just like, you shouldn't be doing this, right? So that's a good example of like a system I put in place, because my flesh suit wants to check it out because it knows something's happening. And it wants the little hit of like, I want to be like in the know. If you think of like, if we were in like a village, 1,000 years ago, you need to know, like, is the lion nearby? Like you need to know that, right? It's like, that's how we stay alive. So we're all primed for that. So again, like putting, knowing what we know now about stress and all that stuff, and knowing that I really don't need to know the death count in Connecticut today versus yesterday, right? It doesn't affect my overall risk assessment. I don't need to know it. So just putting that system in place to stop me from doing it allows me to be a little bit more productive, makes me feel a little bit better. I'm a little more positive during the day, and that kind of keeps me on keel, right? So I don't know, sort of went off on a tangent there, but
no, that's good tips. It's I usually talk about building a fortress around your mind, and so that's what you're saying with the systems that you have in place. So let's talk about leadership. So yeah, there's things going on, things have changed, teams are working differently.
Yeah.
How has your leadership changed at home with the family? How has your leadership changed with your team and with your clients? What's different these days?
Yeah, it's really interesting, man. So my team's always been remote. We're all relatively close together. Like I'm in Connecticut. Most of my team's either in Pennsylvania, Connecticut, or North Carolina. Actually, that's the entire team. I don't know why I said most. So that's kind of where we're located. So we're not too far from each other, but we've always been remote, right? So in terms of like my work life, not a whole ton has changed. At home, it's really interesting, right? So the kids are home all day. My wife has kind of been homeschooling them, right? So she's kind of took over. My kids are in preschool. They're 4 and 6, right? So our homeschooling setup is, I have some of my employees have older children, and the homeschooling like workload is intense for them, right? There's way more stuff to do. They've got to turn in stuff like every day. There's like a curriculum that they're following, and it's a lot of work, right? So for us, it hasn't quite been that, but it's been interesting because it changes the dynamic in the house, right? And so now my wife, particularly, if she feels a lot of pressure to keep them kind of on some sort of school rhythm, right? So it's like, she converted literally our basement into like a schoolhouse, and they have like different sections and like, different places that they go, and they have like a morning routine, and they sing the song that they sang at the school. And she's been doing this amazing job, but it's stressing her out, right? And the kids have kind of lost the novelty of it. They were really into it. Now they're not really into it. And it's like, she's like, do we force them to go to like basement school, or do we just, and we were having this conversation, and I was saying like, here's the thing. It's like, are we worried our kids are falling behind and they're not going to have the skills that they need when they're adults? It's like, I'm not worried about that, right? We read to our kids like 40 times a day that they're great, right? I'm not worried about where they are. Like our kids, unlike many children, because I used to work in schools with kids with either intellectual, difficulties or learning difficulties or whatever. There are many kids for whom a gap like this is really damaging, right? So it's like, that's a whole separate issue. But like for our kids, that's not where they're at, right? And I'm like, they're going to have literally their whole life. So they're going to have like 12 years of just, before college, of being like crafted into the perfect like capitalist worker bee, right? Like that's what school is. It was meant to get you ready for the factory, right? That's where it comes from. So it's like, or the monastery, right? That's where, if you go far enough back. So our whole school system's built around, here's the thing, do the thing the way I told you to do it, like produce the material, like do it on time. It's this very work-oriented system. Even when you're learning, like, you're studying English lit or something, it's still ultimately aimed at like, you need to be able to write a thesis sentence and defend your thesis, because that's what lawyers used to do in the Middle Ages, right? So it's like, you have your whole life to do that. And instead, like, we've been given this, like, this huge gift, which is you have this uninterrupted time. Our two kids, they have this uninterrupted time with each other. They're bonding stronger than I literally, it's like they've developed this intense bond together because they play together all day, every day, right? And it's like, you have this opportunity to like make bread and like just hang out with them. And like, if you shot ahead to when I'm 60, or my wife and I are 60, right? I was like, you would pay any amount of money, anything, to be able to go back in time and spend the entire day in the house with our kids when they were 4 and 6. You would pay anything to be able to do that. And now you get to do it every day. And it's like, it's like, I believe in education. I was trained to be a teacher. I worked in schools for 10 years. But like, maybe just forget about school. Like, forget about it. Like, who cares? You know what I mean? So it's like my role in the family has shifted from like, I'm like very education centered, very education first. When they're in school, I'm like, they really have to show up and blah, 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 bring their best selves to this. And now I'm just like, look, man, who cares? Like, just push the pause button on society for a while and like hang out with our kids. Like, it's fine, right? For our clients, it's really interesting, man. Like, when all this started happening, I said, our role is to show up for our clients, share whatever we can share. Cause I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not an economics expert. I'm not even a real estate investor, even though that's who I work with, right? It's like, I'm a marketer. What do I know? I know what Google Ads is doing for real estate investors, how the ad markets are changing for real estate investors. I've got the biggest data set on that stuff outside of Google. I'm like, that's what I know. So I'm going to show up and talk about that. I'm like, so I have been posting and going live and sending reports to clients. We opened up our data set to pretty much everyone in the industry, anybody. I was like, you want to look at our data? Here's our data. I've been posting it all the time because I was like, people are uncertain, and anything I can do to provide them more information, I'm going to do that. Right. So it's like, show up. I try to talk about, here's the data. Here's what I think it means. Here's what I think it means you should do. But, take my advice for what it's worth. And when I started doing that, I was like, everybody's going to be doing this, right? Like, every agency is going to be showing up, and nobody is. It is weird to me. Like, I'm even in like networking groups with my competitors. So it's like, it's for real estate investors, and there's a couple different people that do what I do. And I'm like, everyone's going to be in this group, like posting about this stuff. And like, nobody is. So for me, I'm like, I just kind of view it as this huge opportunity where I'm like, people are going to remember if you showed up and said, let me help you, and you didn't ask for anything in return, right? Because it's like, it's one thing to like show up and be like, hey, you know how you're in a total disaster and your business is crumbling? Well, like, pay me $10,000 and I'll fix it for you, right? Like, that's one thing. It's a total different thing to be like, hey, I know you're in a tough spot, and what can I do for you right now? And you don't have to pay me, just like, what can I do for you right now, right? And people have done that for me as a business owner, and I've been just trying to do that as much as humanly possible. And it's, it's like, we've lost clients. Like, I expect that, right? But people, they run into situations where they don't have money to do marketing. It's like, money doesn't come from nowhere, right? So I'm like, yeah, you lost your day job. Like, you don't have the money to do this. Fine. So I'm like, no problem. Put you on pause. Like, I will help you now for free, and you can come back anytime, because it's like, I don't want you to, I don't want people to remember that I was like, oh, you're in a rough spot. Well, like, pay me anyway. Right. Like, I want people to get through this and then come back to us. So that's what we've been trying to do. And it's worked well for us. And I think it's just the right thing to do. Right. And I don't know how it is as a marketing strategy, but it's the thing that I feel comfortable doing as a person, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's not a marketing strat. And as you're saying all of that, it's like, now I know why we've been working together all these years. It's like, I have the same beliefs. It's like,
right,
we got to step up, we got to show up, and we got to lead. And this time right now is demonstrating to anybody who's watching who's for real and who's not.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love that you said all of that. And I've been doing the same thing, is stepping up my game for the clients, stepping up whatever I can give them to make sure that they get through this. And so you touched on all of these points just a little bit. But right now, we're going to go into love. What opportunities do you love right now?
Opportunities do I love? Yeah, I mean, so I think that opportunity to step up and become a real authority figure, right? So you think about like what authority really means. And for me, authority is it's something you earn by kind of going first, right? So it's like, you think about like, okay, if you think about like, okay, we want to explore this cave, where it's like, well, who has the authority to tell us what's in the cave? It's like the guy who went into the cave. He was already in the cave. He's the only one, right? You have to earn it, right? And it's a little different from being a leader, right? Because you can be voted the leader, right? You can kind of become the leader by default, right? If you're the only one that steps up. You don't necessarily earn a role of leadership, right? At least in the beginning. But authority you earn because it's like, well, yeah, that guy was in the cave, right? And he's like, yeah, I lived in that cave for a year. What do you want to know about it? And you're like, oh, cool. Like, how is it? He's like, I don't know. It's a cave. It sucks in there. I don't know what to tell you, right? It's like, whatever. But it's a weird metaphor. But you have to earn it, right? So for me, when I'm able to show up like that and kind of teach people as much as humanly possible, right? I'm demonstrating that I know what I'm talking about, right? Like, I don't have to tell someone, hey, I know what I'm talking about. Look at me, like I'm a big muckety muck, right? I just show up and do the stuff and tell people what I know, and that proves it, right? So for me, that's a big opportunity, because I think there are a lot fewer people doing that than I anticipated that there would be, which is, I mean, everybody's got a different approach, but to me, I was kind of surprised by that. And, the kind of the other side of this whole thing that I've been trying to look at as an opportunity, and I went through this in my own business, right? So I always want to be clear with people, like, my business is successful. I'm very proud of it, right? But I am not a good business person. Like, I am here primarily because I have made like literally every possible mistake. Like, I just make mistake after mistake after mistake, right? So one of the things that happened was, when all this stuff started happening and we were like, okay, I was like, look, we have to just assume we're going into a downturn, because if we don't, hooray. But if we do, I want to be prepared for it, right? And so, we're doing everything we got to do. I'm going through like our numbers and the way we structured our team and the way we structured our payments. And I ended up making like all these really tough decisions, right? And, changing how I structured like how we pay our employees and change it and I cut maybe $5,000 worth of software every month, right? Stuff like that. And it was stuff that we didn't need, right? And the payment stuff was stuff I should have done a year ago, but I didn't because I didn't want people to get mad at me, right? That's what it was. It's like, I want everyone to like me. And I was like, oh, but we have the money. And like, yeah, it's kind of irrational to pay this person the way we're paying them, but like, they're happy, right? And I've got the money, who cares, right? So you end up making all these decisions when times are good that are really like not great decisions. They're inefficient, or the things you should fix, but you don't because you don't have to, right? And so for me, I view this thing as like, it's this huge opportunity to make these tough decisions I've been putting off because now I have to, right? I have to. And the flip side of that is that when I actually made those decisions, so for example, like I let a couple of people go from our team that I knew had other jobs, they had other sources of income, right? Or I changed the way that some of the people that work for me get paid, and they end up getting paid kind of more regularly, but they're getting paid less per paycheck now. It's kind of how it's going to work out. And I was really nervous about it because I don't do super well in those situations. I'm not like a hard charging, I'm kind of like, let's all come together and like, let's get unanimity about everything and all this stuff. So when I made that decision and I got on the phone with people and I'm like, hey, here is exactly why I'm making this decision. I'm going to lay out for you all the numbers. Here's what I get paid. Here's what you get paid. Here's what's coming in. Here's our expenses, right? I'm like, I've cut everything I can possibly cut. Here's what's left over. But what's left over at this point, right, is not going to get us to our stated goal of this, and blah, 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 blah. I laid everything out for them. And they were like, down to a person, including the people I let go, were like, I totally get it. No problem. Because everyone understands what's happening right now, right? If you contrast this to like 2008, right? If you went to your employee and said like, I have to let you go because I invested in a toxic asset, and this toxic asset is a bundled mortgage security that blah, 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 blah. No one understands what's happening, right? It's just like, you're a jerk, I hate you, whatever. This is a thing where everyone just gets it, right? Everyone gets it, right? So in that situation, people are like, I totally understand, we're in a really weird spot, you've got to do what's right for the company, and I get it, no problem. Right? So for me, it was like this opportunity to fix this stuff that I really should have fixed before, and to kind of learn this lesson, which is that no matter how much intellectually you understand, that in good times, you are making kind of weak decisions that you wouldn't make in tougher times. It's very different to go through it, live through it, and actually be in those tough times. So like for me, I'm trying to internalize that and internalize all this stuff as a reminder that like, hey, like black swan events are a real thing. And like, even if you're in a moment where like everything's awesome, doesn't mean everything's going to be awesome. So you got to be ready for it to not be awesome, right? You've got to be prepared for that. And so that's been a huge step up for me. Like it's a huge learning thing for me. And I'll tell you what, man, after this is all over, even if we never need it again, I'm going to have 50 cases of toilet paper in my basement, right? I'm going to have it. And I'm like, even if I never need it, I know I'm going to have it. And it's just, that's a very big mind shift for me, but I think it's a good one. And I think it's one that you got to learn from experience, right? I think to really learn it deep down, you got to go through it. It's like one of the things where my wife is a Vietnamese American, but her mom was a first generation Vietnamese immigrant, right? Came over after the war, like literally on a boat. She built herself, like got to, like lost a sibling, like in the process, like literally drowned when they fell off the boat. Like one of the most harrowing immigration stories, right? And incredible success story. And she's since passed away, but like really came here, worked her butt off, and like, and there's a kind of saying where people say it's like the immigrant mentality, right? It is a real thing. And I'm like, the reason it's a real thing is because she went through this experience of, literally having nothing, like not enough food, not enough water, like no security in the sense of like, I don't know if I'm going to be alive next week, right? I, as a upper middle class white dude in America, right? That's where I'm from Glastonbury, Connecticut, right? It's like, I have never experienced anything like that. Like the worst thing I experienced was like my little brother deleted my save file in like Final Fantasy VII when I was 12, and I'd spent like 40 hours playing this video game and I lost it all, right? Like I've never experienced like want like that. And when you feel it and you really feel it deep down, you internalize it, you learn a lesson from that you can't learn any other way, right? And her lesson was, you had better work your butt off to make sure that you have the security to take care of your kids and take care of your family and take care of yourself, right? So for me, this whole thing is like, it's not that by any means a stretch of the imagination, right? Like I'm still home watching Netflix and eating sourdough bread that my wife made. But to me, it's like, it's a real brush with uncertainty that I'm like, hey, let's use this as an opportunity to learn the lesson the world is trying to teach you, which is everything goes in cycles and everything's up and down. And in a world where everything's connected, you don't really understand what's going to happen. You can't predict it. So you better be ready for whatever happens. And that to me is like the huge lesson I'm trying to learn from all this.
So what Dan just said there for you guys listening is hope for the best, plan for the worst.
That is it. Just a little bit shorter. Yeah. Yeah.
I love
hope for
it.
the best and plan for the worst, man. There's a really great financial mental model for the investors use that's called min-max regret. And it basically says you minimize the chance of the situation in which you feel the maximum amount of regret, which is different than minimizing your losses. Because if you, for example, save money by not investing in some stock, but then you see that it blows up and all your friends get rich, you actually might feel worse than if you like lost money, right? By just investing in different stuff. Think about that all the time. It's like, what's the situation in which I feel the most regret? Well, the most regret is like, I could have put something aside that would have gotten my family through this situation and I didn't. That's the situation where you feel the worst. If a meteor hits your house and everything explodes, there's nothing you could have done about it. The worst situation is you could have done something to prevent and you didn't, right? So it's like with like social distancing and the masks and stuff, it's like, there's not a lot of evidence that like it even works, right? But to me, it's like, okay, well, what's the situation in which I feel maximal regret? Maximal regret for me is I get someone sick and they die when I could have done something to prevent it. So even if I don't know if this is working, it's like, it doesn't cost me anything to do it. I'm just going to do it. Right. So it's a really powerful, I mean, it's like the whole thing about like preparing for the worst, man. That's something I would pay lip service to. And I don't think I was really doing. So it's a tough lesson to learn, but it's a strong one. And I think it's going to make me a lot better as a business person as a result.
Absolutely, man. So here's the biggie as we're coming close to the end. And I want you to put yourself in the future, 5 years from now, looking back at this time. How do you want to be remembered?
How do I want to be remembered? Yeah, so the thing I care most about, it's my clients, my team, and my kids, right? And my wife. That was not an order of importance. My wife is watching this.
Whoops.
Like family, clients, team, right? And we're talking about like your zone of control. That's my zone of control, right? To the greatest extent. And there's a friend of mine who's kind of like sort of like become a father figure. Is kind of like a business mentor, right? And he is the type of person, and like everybody kind of has someone in their life that's like this. That's like, hey, do you need to talk? You want to jump on the phone real quick? Like, do you need to talk, right? And I've had like maybe like 3 late night freak out conversations with him, right? And he works primarily in the restaurant industry, which is like, got it way worse than I do, right? And those conversations were really valuable. And he didn't really, it's not like he was like, here's the answer to all your business problems, Dan. Like that wasn't it. It was just when I needed to talk to somebody about it in an open way, in a vulnerable way, right? He was there. not only was he there, he reached out to me. I didn't have to reach out to him. He reached out to me. Right. And so for me, that's how I want to be remembered. It's right. It's like, I saw somebody struggling and I stepped up to help them rather than waiting to be asked to help. And so I'm trying to apply that in my business with my clients, right? So I'm trying to reach out to my clients and be like, what do you need from us, right? The team, right? My team, I've spent a lot of time talking to my team. I've been extremely transparent with like all our expenses. Like, here's what everybody gets paid. Here's how the business operates. Like, what do you need to know? I reached out to everybody and be like, how much do you have in savings? Like, and I have been working my butt off to put as much money away as possible. So that I'm like, if we lose all our clients, I can pay everyone kind of a minimum wage and as for as long as humanly possible, right? And I'm very transparent about how much money we put aside to do that, how long we can, right? So I'm trying to give them exactly what they need. And it's same thing with my family. Like, I'm trying to be, I keep like, I put my kids down and I keep saying like, do you need to talk to me about anything? Like, is there anything on your mind? Because they're kids, right? So it's like, like my kid will be like, well, we can't go outside because of coronavirus. And they don't really know what that means. And I'm like, you can still go outside, but like, just, it's weird for them. So I'm trying to be like, hey, like we had someone in our family pass away from, COVID-19. And it's this really weird situation because like no one can go and visit them, right? So they passed away in the hospital. They were in the hospital for a week. No one got to say goodbye. Even the funerals, like only 5 people could go. It was like this weird situation, right? They're there one day and they're not there the next. And there's no normal grieving process where you go through the whole thing, the whole routine, and you have these kind of landmarks in your head of like, hey, the funeral, and I hugged my grandmother and all this stuff. So I've been trying to check in with them. And, they're young. So they're just like, well, I want to talk about Pokemon. And I'm like, cool, let's talk about it. Right. It's like, I don't know, maybe that's how they're processing it. Maybe it isn't. Same thing with my wife. It's like how, she's home homeschooling them. She's doing a fantastic job. But I'm trying to check in with her and be like, how are you feeling? And trying to get her to realize she doesn't need to beat herself up and stress out about it. And I think the thing I want to be remembered for most is not necessarily that like, hey, Dan has some brilliant idea that fixes everything, because I don't really think that's possible, right? It's just more that like, did I ask first, right? Do you need help? Do you need anything? How are you doing? Like, I'm trying to text my friends. I'm trying to like send memes in chat to as many people as I possible. It's like, hey, here's a stupid meme. Like, get into it. Like, just something, because I don't know. That's what I want people to do for me. And so that's what I'm going to try and put out there as much as possible.
I love it, man. I love it. So this is Dan Barrett, REI Marketing Nerds. Look for him wherever you listen to podcasts. Dan, what I always like to say is thank you for bringing the light, leadership in good and hard times. I appreciate you, brother. That was super entertaining. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, man. This was great. And thank you for doing this show. It's awesome.
Yes, sir. So you are listening to thedailybreadproject.com. We're coming to you live every weekday, 10 a.m. Eastern. That was Dan Barrett, REI Marketing Nerds. Look him up. He's about 90 shows deep. Thank you guys for tuning in. And if you like this episode, if you enjoyed it, make sure to share it with somebody who needs the light. That is a wrap.